The ballroom looked like something out of a magazine. Crystal lights hung from the ceiling, shining softly over polished floors and round tables covered in white cloth. Every detail felt expensive. The chairs were heavy, the plates were flawless, and the air smelled of perfume and fresh flowers. Guests dressed in fine suits and elegant dresses moved around with ease, laughing loudly and holding glasses filled with sparkling drinks. It was the kind of place where everyone wanted to be seen and remembered. At the edge of the room, a young waitress moved quietly from table to table. She carried trays carefully, making sure not to disturb anyone. Her uniform was clean but simple, nothing like the outfits worn by the guests. She kept her head slightly lowered, offering polite smiles when spoken to, then stepping back into the background. Most people barely noticed her, and that was something she had learned to accept. This job was not her dream. It was just a way to pay bills and survive. Every evening, she reminded herself to stay calm, do her work well, and go home without trouble. She had worked many events like this before, filled with rich people who spoke loudly and rarely looked at those serving them. Tonight felt no different, at least at first. Near the center of the hall stood a glossy black piano. It was large, beautiful, and clearly expensive. Its surface reflected the lights above, making it look almost alive. The piano was not there by accident. The host of the party was known for enjoying attention and showing off rare things. He had mentioned earlier that the piano once belonged to a famous performer. Guests had gathered around it earlier in the evening, admiring it, taking photos, and talking about music they barely understood. The waitress noticed the piano as soon as she entered the room. For a brief second, her steps slowed. Her eyes lingered on it just a moment longer than they should have. Something deep inside her stirred, something familiar and warm, but she quickly looked away. She reminded herself where she was and what she was there to do. She adjusted her grip on the tray and continued serving drinks. The millionaire host stood near the piano, surrounded by people listening closely to his stories. He spoke with confidence, his voice strong and clear. He enjoyed being admired and rarely missed a chance to impress. Every laugh, every nod of agreement, made him stand a little taller. This party was his stage and everyone else was there to watch. As the night went on, conversations grew louder. Music played softly in the background, but it was mostly ignored. People talked about money, travel, success, and power. The waitress moved through the crowd again and again, refilling glasses and collecting empty plates. She listened without meaning to. Some conversations were kind, others careless, but none were meant for her. At one table, a guest complained about the temperature. At another, someone snapped their fingers impatiently for service. The waitress handled each moment with quiet patience. She had learned that reacting only made things harder. Staying calm was safer. When she passed near the piano again, someone brushed past her, nearly causing her to spill a drink. She steadied herself just in time. Her heart raced for a second, but she smiled politely and apologized, even though it was not her fault. The guest barely acknowledged her before turning back to their conversation. Across the room, the host noticed the small moment. He watched her recover quickly, impressed by how she kept her balance. He leaned closer to one of his guests and said something with a grin. The group laughed lightly. Their attention slowly shifted toward the waitress, though she did not realize it yet. A little later, the waitress stopped near the side table to adjust the arrangement of glasses. She felt eyes on her but ignored the feeling. She focused on her task, breathing steadily. Then she heard a voice from behind her. "Excuse me," the voice said, loud enough for others to hear. She turned and saw the host standing there, smiling in a friendly but confident way. Several guests followed him, curious. "Yes, sir," she replied softly. He looked at her name tag for a moment, then back at her face. "You're very calm," he said. "You move like someone used to pressure." She was unsure how to respond. "Thank you," she said politely. One of the guests laughed. "That's just good service," they said. The host raised a hand slightly. "Maybe," he replied. Then he looked at the piano behind him. "But I heard something interesting earlier." The waitress felt a sudden tightness in her chest. She did not know why, but a sense of worry crept in. "What did you hear?" another guest asked. The host smiled wider. "That our waitress here has a musical background." The room did not go silent, but nearby conversations slowed. A few heads turned. The waitress froze for half a second before forcing herself to remain calm. "I'm not sure what you mean," she said carefully. The host chuckled. "No need to be shy. Someone mentioned you once studied piano." Her face warmed. She had never spoken about that at work. She did not know who had said it or why. "I played a little a long time ago," she replied. Her voice was steady, but her hands felt cold. The host glanced at the piano again. "That's interesting," he said. "Very interesting." Guests leaned in closer. Some smiled, others looked curious. A few exchanged glances, sensing something entertaining was about to happen. The waitress felt exposed. She wished she could disappear into the crowd again. This was not part of her job. She had not come here to be noticed. "Well," the host said, clapping his hands softly, "this evening is about enjoyment, about surprises." He turned to the guests. "Wouldn't it be fun to see a surprise?" A few people laughed. Someone nodded eagerly. The waitress swallowed hard. She could feel the moment slipping out of her control. She looked at the piano, then back at the host. "I'm working right now," she said gently. "I should continue serving." The host raised an eyebrow, still smiling. "Of course," he said. "No pressure. Just a thought." But the way he looked at her made it clear that the thought was not going away. The guests waited, curious and expectant. The waitress felt her heart beating faster. Memories she had buried long ago stirred quietly inside her. She nodded once, not agreeing, not refusing, simply acknowledging his words. Then she picked up her tray and stepped away, leaving the host and his guests behind. As she moved toward the kitchen area, she tried to steady her breathing. She told herself it was nothing. Just talk. Still, her hands trembled slightly. Behind her, the host watched her go, eyes thoughtful and amused. He turned back to his guests and spoke in a low voice. Laughter followed. The piano sat silently under the lights, waiting. And the waitress did not know that this quiet moment was only the beginning. The kitchen area behind the ballroom was quieter, but not calm. Plates clinked, staff moved quickly, and low voices filled the space. The waitress stood near the counter, trying to steady her hands. She placed the tray down and took a slow breath. Her reflection in a metal surface looked tired, but focused. She told herself to stay professional and forget what just happened. Another server walked past and gave her a curious look. "You okay?" they asked softly. She nodded. "Just a long night." That was easier than explaining the tight feeling in her chest. She had learned long ago that her past was not something to share easily, especially not in places like this. As she waited for the next order, her eyes drifted back toward the ballroom. She could still see the piano from where she stood. The lights around it made it look almost unreal. For a moment, the noise around her faded, replaced by a different sound. The sound of keys, steady and warm. A memory she had pushed away returned without asking. Years ago, her life had been very different. Music had once filled her days. She remembered small practice rooms, worn benches, and the quiet discipline of learning each note. She remembered how the piano had felt like a place where the world made sense. But life had changed. Responsibilities came fast, and dreams had been pushed aside. Music became something private, something she carried quietly instead of sharing. A voice snapped her back to the present. "Table 12 needs more drinks." She picked up another tray and nodded. "On it." Walking back into the ballroom, she felt the energy shift. People were louder now, more relaxed. Laughter echoed across the room. As she moved between tables, she noticed more eyes following her. Not in a kind way, not in a cruel way either. Just curious. The host stood near the piano again, holding a glass, talking animatedly. When he noticed her, he paused. Their eyes met briefly. He lifted his glass slightly, almost like a greeting. She looked away and continued working. At one table, a guest leaned toward another and whispered something while glancing in her direction. She pretended not to notice. She had dealt with attention before, though it was usually unwanted for different reasons. This felt different, heavier. She served drinks with steady movements, though her thoughts raced. She wondered who had mentioned her past. She had been careful, very careful. The idea of being put on the spot in front of people like this made her stomach twist. As she passed near the piano again, the host spoke up. "There she is." The words carried across the nearby space. A few people turned fully now. She stopped, forced by the moment. "Yes?" she asked politely. "You didn't disappear on us," he said with a smile. "I was worried." "I'm just doing my job," she replied. He nodded. "Of course. I respect that." Then he glanced around at the guests. "But curiosity is part of a good party." A few people laughed lightly. Someone said, "Let her be." The host raised a hand again. "I will. I just wanted to ask one thing." He turned back to her. "How long has it been since you last played?" The question felt personal. Too personal. She hesitated. "A long time," she said honestly. "That doesn't mean you forgot," he replied. She did not answer. She shifted her weight slightly, uncomfortable. Another guest spoke up. "Come on, it could be fun." She shook her head gently. "I don't think this is appropriate." The host studied her face. For the first time, his expression changed. The playful confidence softened into interest. "You're right," he said. "It's not your obligation." Relief washed over her, but it did not last long. "Still," he continued, "sometimes the best moments are unexpected." The waitress felt the room lean in again. She could sense the unspoken pressure. Not forceful but present. "I'm not prepared," she said quietly. He smiled. "Neither is life." There was no cruelty in his voice, but there was challenge. The kind that dared someone to step forward. She looked at the piano. Memories pressed closer now. She remembered cold mornings when her fingers ached from practice. She remembered applause that felt distant, unreal. She remembered stopping, telling herself it was temporary. Then time had moved on. "I really should continue working," she said. The host nodded slowly. "I understand." He stepped back slightly, giving her space. "Think about it." She picked up her tray and moved away, heart pounding. She wished she had never looked at the piano. She wished she had stayed invisible. Near the back of the room, she paused by a service station. She rested the tray down and closed her eyes for a brief moment. Her breathing was shallow. She told herself this was just another event, another shift. But the music inside her would not stay quiet. Across the room, the host watched her again. He spoke softly to a guest beside him. "There's something there," he said. "You can see it." The guest shrugged. "Or she's just uncomfortable." "Maybe," the host replied. "Or maybe she's hiding something remarkable." Minutes passed. The party continued, but a strange tension hung in the air. Some guests looked toward the piano, then toward the waitress. Whispers spread. She felt it building, like a wave she could not stop. Her hands no longer trembled. Instead, they felt strangely warm, familiar, alive. A thought crossed her mind, quiet but firm. Maybe this was not about them. Maybe it was about her. She picked up her tray again, finished her tasks, and finally returned to the kitchen. She leaned against the counter, staring at nothing. One of the staff members approached her. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to," they said kindly. She nodded. "I know." But knowing and deciding were not the same. She looked back toward the ballroom one more time. The piano waited, untouched. The lights around it seemed brighter now. She took a deep breath. Something was about to change. And she knew that when she walked back into that room, she would not be the same person she was when she left it. The waitress stepped back into the ballroom with a steady pace, even though her thoughts were anything but calm. The noise of the party wrapped around her again, familiar yet different. Felt louder now, sharper. Every laugh seemed to linger longer. Every glance felt heavier. She focused on her work, moving from table to table, collecting empty glasses and offering refills. Her face stayed neutral, polite. Inside, memories stirred with every step. She could still feel the shape of piano keys under her fingers, even though it had been years since she last touched one. At one table, a guest thanked her warmly. She nodded and smiled. That small kindness helped more than they knew. It reminded her that not everyone was watching for entertainment. Some people simply noticed effort. Near the center of the room, the host was speaking again, his voice calm but clear. "Music has a way of revealing people," he said to those around him. "It shows patience, discipline, and honesty." She pretended not to hear, but the words reached her anyway. A few guests nodded thoughtfully. Others looked toward the piano. The unspoken expectation drifted through the room like smoke. She finished her round and paused near the edge of the ballroom. Her hands were no longer shaking. Instead, they felt ready, as if they remembered something her mind had tried to forget. She thought about the nights she had spent practicing alone, about choosing responsibility over passion, about telling herself that dreams could wait. She had believed it then. She wasn't so sure now. The host noticed her pause. He excused himself from the group and walked toward her, stopping a respectful distance away. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable," he said quietly. "That's not my intention." She met his eyes. "Then please let me do my job." He nodded. "Fair." He glanced at the piano again. "But if you ever wanted to remind yourself who you are, that piano is here." There was no challenge in his voice this time, just an invitation. She looked past him at the guests. Some watched openly. Others pretended not to. She realized something then. No matter what she chose, this moment would pass. The only thing that would remain was how she felt about her choice. "I need a minute," she said. He stepped aside. "Take all the time you need." She moved toward a quiet corner and leaned lightly against the wall. Her breathing slowed. She closed her eyes and pictured the piano not as a stage, but as a place of comfort. A place where mistakes were part of learning, not something to fear. When she opened her eyes, the room seemed clearer. She walked back toward the piano, slowly, deliberately. The sound of the party softened behind her. Conversations faded as people noticed her path. Someone whispered, "Is she really going to play?" Another replied, "I don't know." She reached the piano and rested her hand on its smooth surface. The cool touch sent a calm through her body. She pulled out the bench and sat down, adjusting it slightly, just as she had done countless times before. The room went quiet. She placed her hands on her lap for a moment and took a deep breath. This wasn't about proving anything. It was about remembering. Her fingers moved to the keys, light at first. She tested a single note, then another. The sound was clear, rich. She felt a small smile form, almost without her noticing. She began to play. The first melody was gentle, careful. It flowed like a conversation, simple but sincere. Guests leaned forward in their seats. Some stopped mid-sip. Others set their glasses down without realizing it. As the music continued, her confidence grew. Her hands moved with ease, finding familiar patterns. The years away melted into the background. This was not performance. This was truth. The room felt different now, warmer. Still, the host stood quietly, his earlier confidence replaced with focus. He watched her hands, then her face. He saw not a waitress, but a musician who had been waiting for the right moment. The melody shifted, becoming stronger. Emotion filled the space between notes. A few guests exchanged surprised looks. This was not what they had expected. She played as if no one else existed, as if the room belonged only to her and the piano. Each note carried a piece of her journey, the choices, the sacrifices, the hope she had never fully let go. When the final note faded, silence followed. Not the awkward kind, but the kind that meant something had landed. Then applause erupted. People stood. Some clapped loudly. Others wiped their eyes, surprised by their own reaction. The sound filled the ballroom, echoing off the walls. She stood slowly, her heart racing. For a moment, she didn't know what to do. She wasn't used to this kind of attention anymore. The host approached her, his expression serious. "Thank you," he said simply. She nodded, unsure of what to say. "That took courage," he added. "And talent." She felt a mix of relief and pride. Not because of their approval, but because she had listened to herself. The applause faded into gentle conversation again, but the mood had changed. People spoke more softly now, more thoughtfully. She stepped away from the piano and returned to her duties, but everything felt different. Guests smiled at her with new respect. Some thanked her quietly as she passed. She knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning of something she had forgotten how to imagine. As the night continued, she carried herself a little taller. The piano remained behind her, silent once more, but its presence lingered. And deep inside, a door had reopened. She didn't know where it would lead, but for the first time in a long while she was ready to find out. The applause slowly settled into a gentle hum of conversation. People returned to their seats, still talking about what they had just heard. The waitress stepped back into her routine, but nothing felt routine anymore. Her hands moved with confidence as she collected glasses and offered refills. Her shoulders were relaxed. Her breath was steady. A few guests stopped her to say thank you. One said the music reminded them of home. Another said they hadn't expected to feel so moved at a party like this. She listened, nodded, and smiled. She didn't explain herself. She didn't need to. From across the room, the host watched quietly. He didn't rush back into conversation. He seemed thoughtful, almost reserved. The piano stood behind him, closed now, as if resting. The waitress passed by the piano once more, her fingers brushing the edge as she walked. It felt familiar, like saying goodbye to a friend who promised to stay in touch. Later, she returned to the kitchen to clear a few items. The noise back there felt distant now. One of the staff members looked at her with wide eyes. "That was you?" they asked. She smiled gently. "Yeah. You were amazing," they said. "I didn't know." "Most people don't," she replied. She picked up another tray and headed back out. The ballroom lights seemed softer. The energy had shifted from excitement to reflection. The host approached her again, this time without an audience. "May I speak with you for a moment?" he asked. She paused, then nodded. "Sure." They stepped slightly aside, near a quiet corner. He spoke carefully. "I want to apologize if earlier I crossed a line." She appreciated that he didn't make excuses. "It was uncomfortable," she said honestly. "I can see that now," he replied. "But I'm grateful you played." She considered his words. "I didn't do it for anyone else," she said. He smiled faintly. That was clear. They stood in silence for a moment, listening to the soft background music. "You have a gift," he said. "And discipline. Those don't disappear." She looked down briefly. "Life changes." "Yes," he agreed. "But it doesn't erase who we are." She nodded, feeling understood without being judged. As they spoke, a few guests watched from a distance. Some whispered. Others simply observed, curious but respectful. "I won't ask you to play again tonight," he said. "But I would like to hear more someday if you're willing." She appreciated the choice he offered. "Maybe," she said. He thanked her again and returned to his guests. The waitress finished her shift later that night. As the party wound down, people gathered coats and said their goodbyes. Several stopped to thank her personally. One slipped her a generous tip. Another asked where she had learned to play. She answered politely but briefly. When the last guest left, the ballroom felt empty and quiet. The lights dimmed. Chairs were stacked. The piano remained, silent and still. She helped clean up, moving slowly, savoring the calm. Her thoughts were clear for the first time in a long while. She didn't feel regret. She felt relief. When her shift ended, she stepped outside into the cool night air. The city lights reflected off wet pavement. She took a deep breath and let it out slowly. Her phone buzzed with a message from a family member asking how work went. She typed back. It was unexpected, but good. She walked to the bus stop, replaying the music in her mind. The sound stayed with her, steady and reassuring. At home, she sat by the window for a long time before going to bed. She didn't turn on the television. She didn't scroll through her phone. She simply listened to the quiet. Sleep came easily. The next morning, she woke earlier than usual. Sunlight filled the room. She stretched, feeling rested. As she made coffee, her eyes drifted to the corner where an old keyboard sat, covered with a cloth. She hadn't touched it in months. She pulled the cloth back and pressed a key. The sound was softer than the grand piano, but familiar, comforting. She played for a few minutes, then stopped, smiling to herself. Later that day, she returned to work for another shift. The restaurant was quieter during the afternoon. A few co-workers greeted her with excitement. Word had spread faster than she expected. "You're famous," one joked. She laughed. Not really, but she could feel something had changed. Not around her, but within her. Midway through the shift, a message came through the restaurant manager. "Someone left a note for you," they said. She unfolded the paper carefully. It was from the host. Short and respectful. He thanked her again and said he would like to talk sometime about music, no pressure, no expectations. A number was written at the bottom. She folded the note and slipped it into her pocket. She didn't decide anything right away. That evening, she returned home and sat with her thoughts. She remembered why she had loved music in the first place. Not for applause, not for recognition, but because it made her feel whole. She placed the note on the table and looked at it for a long time. She didn't know what the next step would be, but she knew one thing for certain. She was done hiding. The days that followed felt different, as if the air around her had shifted. Nothing dramatic happened right away. She still woke early, still went to work, still counted tips and checked schedules. But something inside her had changed. She noticed it in small ways, in how she stood straighter, in how she no longer rushed past the old keyboard at home, in how music returned to her thoughts without effort. At work, guests sometimes asked if she was the one who had played at the party. She answered simply, without pride or shame. Some smiled with recognition. Others just nodded and moved on. She didn't need more than that. One afternoon, during a quiet moment, she took the note out of her pocket again. The paper was creased now, softened from being folded and unfolded. She read the words slowly, not because they were hard to understand, but because she wanted to feel what they stirred in her. There was no pressure in the message. No promise of fame or money, just respect and an open door. That night, she sat at her small table with a cup of tea and the note in front of her. She thought about all the times she had said no to herself, about the fear of hoping again, about the comfort of staying where she was, unseen but safe. She also thought about the piano under the lights, about how it had felt to let go, even for a few minutes. She picked up her phone and typed a short reply. She paused before sending it, then pressed the button. The response came the next day. Simple and polite. They agreed to meet in a public place, no expectations, just a conversation. When the day arrived, she chose clothes that felt like her. Nothing fancy, nothing hidden. She arrived early and sat by the window watching people pass. The host arrived on time. He looked different without the spotlight of the party. Calmer, less certain even. They spoke about music first, about how it enters people's lives in unexpected ways. She shared pieces of her past without giving too much away. He listened more than he spoke. "I didn't mean to put you on display," he said at one point. "I know," she replied, "but it still mattered." He nodded. "I learned something that night." "So did I," she said. They talked about possibilities, about small performances, about practice spaces, about taking steps without rushing. Nothing was promised, and somehow that made it feel more real. After the meeting, she walked home slowly. The city felt familiar but new. She realized she wasn't chasing a dream anymore. She was walking toward herself. In the weeks that followed, she practiced again. Not hours at a time, just enough to reconnect. Some days felt easy, others didn't. She allowed both. She still worked her shifts, still smiled at guests, still carried trays, but she also carried music with her again. One evening, she was invited to play at a small gathering. No stage, no crowd, just a room and a piano. She hesitated, then agreed. The night was quiet and warm. She played a few pieces, simple and honest. People listened. Some closed their eyes. When she finished, there was gentle applause. No shock, no gasps, just appreciation. She felt grounded. Word spread slowly, naturally. Nothing went viral. Nothing exploded. And she was grateful for that. One morning, she received an email about a local music program looking for instructors. She stared at the screen for a long time before applying. When she was invited for an interview, her hands shook. But she went anyway. She spoke honestly. About her journey. About stopping and starting. About fear. They listened. Days later, she received the offer. She didn't quit her job right away. She adjusted her hours. She took it step by step. Teaching felt different from performing. It required patience, presence, listening. She discovered she was good at it. At night, she sometimes thought back to the party, to how close she had come to refusing, to how easily the moment could have passed. She didn't blame herself for the years she spent silent. She understood now that survival sometimes comes first. But she also understood that staying silent forever was a choice. One evening, after a long day, she sat at the keyboard and played softly. The notes filled the room, steady and sure. She smiled, not because she had been seen, but because she had finally seen herself. The future still felt uncertain, but it no longer felt closed. And that made all the difference. The months passed quietly, the way meaningful change often does. There were no sudden headlines or dramatic turns. Life continued with small adjustments, steady choices, and honest work. The waitress no longer felt like she was waiting for permission. She was simply living with intention. Her days balanced between teaching, practicing, and working a few shifts each week. The rhythm suited her. Teaching brought a different kind of joy. Watching someone discover a note for the first time, seeing confidence grow where doubt once lived, reminded her why music mattered. It wasn't about being seen. It was about being heard. Sometimes, after class, a student would linger to ask a question or share a small success. She listened patiently, remembering how much it meant when someone believed in her. She made sure to offer the same care. At home, the keyboard was no longer covered. It stood by the window, catching afternoon light. She played most evenings, not to impress anyone, but to stay connected. Some nights were filled with energy. Others were quiet and reflective. Both felt right. She stayed in occasional contact with the host. Their conversations were respectful and brief. He attended one small performance, sitting in the back, clapping softly when it ended. They exchanged a nod afterward. Nothing more was needed. One evening, after a long week, she received a message from a former coworker. The restaurant was hosting a charity dinner, smaller and calmer than the last event. They asked if she would consider playing during the evening. No spotlight, no announcement, just background music. She took her time responding. When the night arrived, she walked into the familiar space with a calm heart. The room looked different without the noise and pressure. The piano waited quietly, not demanding anything. She sat and began to play as guests arrived. Soft melodies filled the room, weaving through conversation. Some people noticed, others didn't. That was okay. As the evening went on, a few guests paused to listen. One closed their eyes. Another smiled without knowing why. She felt grounded. Afterward, she packed up and prepared to leave. The host approached, not with excitement, but with sincerity. "You found your way," he said. She nodded. "I think so. I'm glad," he replied. They parted with a quiet understanding. Walking home that night, she reflected on how much had changed without changing who she was. She hadn't become someone new. She had simply returned to herself. Weeks later, she was offered a chance to help design a small community music program. Nothing grand, just a room, a few instruments, and open doors. She accepted. The first day, children and adults filled the space with nervous energy. She welcomed them warmly. She spoke about patience, about listening, about allowing mistakes. When someone struggled, she reminded them that progress was not loud. It was steady. She watched confidence grow in the room, one note at a time. Late one evening, after the program ended, she stayed behind to clean up. She sat at the piano and played a simple tune. The room echoed softly. She thought back to the night that started it all. The dare, the silence, the first note. She smiled. That moment had not defined her. Her response to it had. She locked up and stepped into the night air, feeling at peace. Life still held uncertainty. There were bills, responsibilities, and hard days. But there was also purpose. She knew now that talent didn't disappear when ignored. It waited. And when given space, it returned stronger, wiser, and more honest than before. She walked on, carrying music not as a secret, but as a part of who she was. Not because a room once gasped, but because she finally listened to herself.